Wisconsin football is in a peculiar position entering the fall of 2023. There are two schools of thought that I think are appropriate to designate the Wisconsin Badgers. On one hand, you have an argument where Wisconsin is criminally underrated entering 2023, and the other seems to be the opposite extreme, that Wisconsin will fall flat on its face entering 2023. And of course, there is the middle ground. The middle ground is always, for most cases, the middle ground in life and in college football is always an appropriate school of thought. But I want to have some fun in this video, so I just want to talk about the two extreme arguments, which I think, by the way, have a lot of weight to them. On one hand, for the camp that says Wisconsin is criminally underrated, you have the fact that Wisconsin is leaving behind its old power run, pro-style offense that looked like it was pioneered in the 1800s before any of us were born. And not only that, but Wisconsin has a top 25 transfer portal class coming in. They have a great offensive coordinator and offensive mind in Phil Longo, and the same on the defensive side in Mike Tressel. Wisconsin's new modern air raid isn't your typical air raid. You might look at air raid and think that that doesn't fit Wisconsin and their personnel at all. And from the stance of a Mike Leach air raid, rest in peace, you'd be absolutely correct. But the air raid that's coming to Wisconsin is one that would be similar to North Carolina and TCU last year. Phil Longo was in fact North Carolina's offensive coordinator in the 2022 season when Drake May was having near top odds to reach the Heisman ceremony in New York before North Carolina went on an 0-4 run after starting out 9-1. This air raid allows for a run game and allows for mobile quarterback play and the usage of tight ends. And it works very well for Wisconsin because Wisconsin's wide receiver room, I think, is the room with the biggest question marks. The tight ends are good. The running backs with Braelon Allen and Chez Mellusi are elite. The offensive line, I think, has some competency at minimum. It will be great at maximum. And I think quarterback, bringing in Nick Evers, Tanner Mordecai, and the third stringer from Mississippi State, whose name escapes me, Braden Locke, maybe. I think that offense will work, in my opinion. And I think that the evidence is there. You look at Keandre Miller in 2022, 1,000-yard rusher with an air raid. You look at North Carolina in 2020 when they had, I forget the name of their running backs, but they both went off to the NFL. One got drafted by the Broncos, I remember. And they had success, tremendous success on the ground. Phil Longo has a reputation with quarterbacks. Mike Tressel, if you watch his defenses at Michigan State or Cincinnati, you can just tell that both of the coordinators are high-level Power 5 guys. But that's just one side. That's one argument. The other argument to this, and I formulated this argument mostly from Michigan podcast, headed by Steve Dace, he brought up a very good point in that Wisconsin is making a complete... everything's being flipped upside down. You're going from a power run game, old, outdated offense. It can work well without a competent QB. I mean, Paul Chryst went 9-4, 13-1, and 11-3 in multiple different years, and even 10-3 in his first year without having good quarterback play. In all of those seasons, he had at best above average quarterback play, at worst, some of the worst quarterback play that I've ever witnessed with my two eyes wide open. And you're transforming it into an offense in 1 year, albeit you do have the transfer portal, which makes that transformation easier. You're going to an offense that relies on having good quarterback play. Relies on it. TCU and North Carolina's offenses will not give you 11 or 13 win seasons without good quarterback play like Paul Chryst's offenses could. Because with Paul Christ's offense, and granted it was with a weaker schedule than what Luke Fickell will face beyond the year 2023, when the West Division and the heresy that was is abolished, with a power run game, all you need is an elite O-line, an elite pair of running backs, good tight ends, and an okay quarterback with an okay wide receiver core. And that's what Paul Chryst had for most of his tenure. You need more than that to run this offense. And there is a lot of uncertainty behind whether Wisconsin has what it takes for this offense to take off successfully. Plus, the Big Ten, while I do think that the air raid will do a lot to confuse Big Ten defenses, and that's my opinion, if you couldn't already tell from this video and previous videos, I'm siding for now with the side that has Wisconsin as criminally underrated, but I want to steelman the opposing argument. The opposing argument is perfectly logical and makes perfect sense because not just from the standpoint of we don't know if Wisconsin has the personnel, even with the portal to make this work. Tanner Mordecai looked atrocious in the spring game. The Big Ten is not the Big 12 and it's not the ACC. Part of this is because the Big Ten historically, outside of Ohio State, has much worse quarterback play. Another part of it is their defenses are much, much, much better than the Big 12, the ACC, Pac-12, and some might even make the argument that because of schools like Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, when Jim Leonhard was there, and even Michigan and Ohio State before the 2018 season, when Luke Fickell was in fact their defensive coordinator, there's an argument that the Big Ten might be the best defensive conference. And that's why when Scott Frost's spread option came, where it worked at Oregon and it worked at UCF, it's not the entire reason, but a large reason why he failed at Nebraska was because the defenses he lined up against. And the spread option had no counterpunch for Big Ten defenses. Just look at Oregon versus Ohio State in the inaugural college football playoff national title game. The spread option had no counterpunch for those physical defenses. So there's a lot of question marks, a lot of things that could go very right for Wisconsin, and a lot of things that could go very wrong. Wisconsin is a team that could have a floor, I think, as low as probably 8-5. And that's pretty darn low, given the fact that they only have Ohio State and not both Michigan and Ohio State or Ohio State and Penn State on their schedule. They only really have one tough crossover game. Their non-conference isn't tough. Washington State was a problem for them last year, but I don't anticipate that being a repeat thing for Wisconsin. They are still playing in the Big Ten West. 8-5 in the Big Ten West would be disappointing, especially given Luke Fickell's reputation and given the fact that Wisconsin, even under the later Chryst years, was accustomed to doing better. They went 9-4 with Graham Mertz in 2021 in one of the toughest schedules in the country, playing both Michigan, Ohio State, and Notre Dame, who all finished inside of the top 10. Wisconsin could also do the complete inverse and reach the college football playoff and pull a TCU and win a college football playoff game. That I also have no doubt about, because they return enough on defense, especially at linebacker. They return some good pieces at the offensive line and tight end. Chimere Dike, their best wide receiver, returns as well, along with Braelon Allen and Chez Mellusi. They have enough returning experience. They have a great enough coaching staff and head coach, and they have good enough transfer portal additions to be playoff contenders, in my mind. So there are a lot of question marks, a lot of things that could go right or wrong for Wisconsin in 2023. But a main reason why they will either succeed or fail depends on the transfer portal. Wisconsin has to overhaul their entire team. They have to overhaul it. And how you do that in the modern era is by a combination of high school recruiting long-term and transfer portal short-term. Rich Rodriguez, when he tried to reinstall or install the spread at Michigan and completely change everything in year one, he did not have the transfer portal. If the transfer portal existed when he came to Michigan, Michigan football history might be changed forever. You weren't able to bring in a quarterback and play him immediately who fit your scheme. At minimum, he had to sit out for 1 year. At max, you didn't get him and you were stuck with the system that the other guy left behind. It took longer to rebuild. Wisconsin so far, though, has brought in over 10 players from the portal, 13 to be exact. 2 are 4 stars, Tanner Mordecai and CJ Williams. 10 are 3 stars, and 1 is a 2-star. They're second place in the Big Ten transfer portal rankings. They're only behind Indiana, who's up there at 14th with 22 transfer portal commits. Wisconsin has a transfer portal commit average that's actually lower than Indiana's, 87.38. But Wisconsin's high school recruiting and roster is much better than Indiana's, and Indiana's also losing some key pieces to other schools via the portal. Wisconsin didn't. I have no clue how 24/7 Sports ranked Graham Mertz as a 90 overall quarterback. They ranked him ahead of Drew Pine and Cade McNamara, which was ridiculous, but it is what it is. I don't have to understand that lunacy. The biggest addition by far was Tanner Mordecai, and Luke Fickell also brought in 2 additional quarterbacks. The quarterback room has been completely rebuilt. Chase Wolf, Deacon Hill, they're gone, along with Graham Mertz. The Paul Chryst era, when it comes to quarterbacks, I think is only being carried on by Miles Burkett. That's it. Everything else relating to Paul Chryst and quarterbacks has been removed. And Burkett being a redshirt freshman means he's basically still able to be fully developed by the current coaching staff. No one else. The running back room, which was the strength of the Chryst era, is almost completely intact. Isaac Garendo transferred to Louisville, but Chez Mellusi and Braelon Allen, who were the starting 2 running backs, they're still here. Tight end, parts of the offensive line, which were strengths in the Chryst era, though the offensive line was horrendous by Wisconsin standards in 2022, it's still there. Wisconsin, for the most part, under Luke Fickell and the new regime, only changed what they had to change. That's why they brought in 4 transfer wide receivers, 2 offensive linemen, because they needed a new center. They brought in Jake Renfro and Joe Huber, who are currently make up only centers. Huber's the second string center, Renfro is the starting center, and I believe he was the starting center at Cincinnati. So they brought in new leadership on the offensive line, who Fickell was comfortable with. They rebuilt the wide receiver core outside of DK, Skylar Bell, and Keontez Lewis, who were the better wide receivers at Wisconsin last year. Running back remained untouched. There were some portal players that were brought in on defense. Darian Varner, Jeff Pietrowski, who's great at Michigan State but got injured last year, and Jason, I think, Maitre? Or I don't know. Maybe I butchered that name. Sorry if I did. Only one of those guys, Maitre, at noseback, is starting. Everyone else, including some familiar players like Isaiah Mullins for defensive end and Meima Njongmeta, one of the best linebackers in the country, he's still around. Everyone else is not an incoming transfer. So some of these transfers were added for depth purposes along with starting purposes. Wisconsin's roster for the past several years has actually been increasing pretty rapidly in on-field talent. The problem was Chryst's coaching, which looked very genius in 2015, 16, 17, and 19, was falling. And it began to fall rather sharply toward the end of his tenure, which was why he was fired that early into the 2022 season. But here we are. This class is going to determine a lot. CJ Williams, Tanner Mordecai, the starting wide receivers and quarterbacks, they're going to determine a lot, honestly. Will Pauling as well, because this offense being an air raid, being much more pass-heavy and shotgun, this is one of the first times we've ever seen, it's like breaking news, Wisconsin quarterbacks will be in the shotgun in 2023. They'll determine a lot of this team's success. I'm pretty confident, and I think anyone else could be confident that the defense will be successful in 2023. Luke Fickell's a defensive-minded head coach. He has a great DC in Mike Tressel, and the defense has enough key playmakers on it that were on the team last year to where I think they can and will have success, and I think many would agree with me. The main question is the offense. The offense, I think, is the biggest question mark, especially at quarterback and wide receiver, and the spring game did not calm any of those anxieties. Tanner Mordecai threw 4 interceptions. Now, I think the defense is phenomenal, and I think the spring game showed part of that, but I don't think the defense is the best in the nation. I don't think the defense is elite enough to where you should be seeing Tanner Mordecai in a spring game that, granted everything's simpler, and a spring game is supposed to make the defense look good anyway because the offense is running simple concepts, but throwing 4 interceptions is a lot. Granted, Justin Fields looked bad in the 2019 OSU spring game and then went on to the Heisman ceremony, but still, it's something to talk about, so we're going to talk about it. This portal class is going to determine a whole lot, and it's going to answer a lot of these questions that we all have. The first, of course, being, can Phil Longo's air raid settle in, or does it absolutely fall flat on its face? The reminder again that we don't need to repeat, but the spring game, and also the fact that it is year 1, it's a completely new scheme that goes against everything Wisconsin football has been since the Barry Alvarez era. Braelon Allen and Chez Mellusi, they're going to get playing time. They're going to run the football, but the offensive line is question marks too. Same with wide receiver and quarterback, and there are a lot of ways that this could go perfectly, and no one can stop Wisconsin's offense except for Michigan, Ohio State, and maybe Penn State. The schools that have elite defenses in the Big Ten are the only ones who can hold them to 20 or 30 points. There's also a way that this goes horribly wrong, and any team with a defensive pulse can just shut this offense down because it's too chaotic. Or the offense goes through a series where it's hot, cold, and it's very inconsistent, which would also be disastrous. Another question is the defense really elite, or is it just a paper tiger? That's another good question, I think. And I say this because I really say this just because this isn't a Georgia, Michigan, or Ohio State defense where you have 4- and 5-star depth. 5-star depth, especially when you're talking about Georgia, at every position. If you get an injury on this kind of defense, there's going to be holes created. And Wisconsin's schedule is easy enough because it plays in the West to where they could look really good against all of their opponents: Buffalo, Washington State, Georgia Southern, Purdue, Rutgers, Iowa, and Illinois, and they play Ohio State late in October, and Ohio State just runs them over. I mean, you look at the road games at Washington State, road game at Purdue, and road game at Illinois, none of those teams will have good enough offenses to truly test or push Wisconsin's defense, and if they do, then we just know flat out that Wisconsin's defense isn't even a paper tiger. It's just not that good. Or maybe it was vulnerable in a game. But it could be a paper tiger. It could be really good. I don't think that it's going to be flat out bad, at least obviously. They have enough talent, and Mike Tressel's a good enough head coach to, if there are foibles and if there are holes, he will hide them the best he can. And even with Cade McNamara or Luke Altmaier, if you're talking about Illinois, those quarterbacks and supporting casts probably aren't going to burn open those holes if they exist. But Ohio State will, and to mention a team who I also want to talk about in a coming video, Minnesota will be able to. Minnesota is not only a rival of Wisconsin, but they also, despite not changing their coaching staff much, their offense changed. And it changed because the portal, because of certain returning starters and departing starters, like Mo Ibrahim in the interior O-line departing, but the tackles and all the wide receivers and tight ends returning, along with Ethan Kaliakmanis. When your tackles return, your wide receivers improve through the portal and through returning production, and you have a solid quarterback, but the interior of your O-line leaves and your best running back by a mile leaves, your team is going to naturally be better at passing the football after that whole process happens. Minnesota is one of the few Big Ten teams that I think could legitimately go 5 wide and be perfectly fine and have perfectly capable wide receivers, all 5 of them, if they went 5 wide. They also have a great tight end in Brevin Spanford. The main question for them is quarterback, interior of the O-line, but I think the exterior of their O-line will be great, and with Sean Tyler, I think their running back room will be completely set. Really, only those 2 teams will truly be able to test Wisconsin's defense. I think Nebraska could as well, but that's a home game, and Nebraska has their own questions. And heck, maybe Iowa or maybe Purdue can. Iowa, just because their supporting cast is good. Purdue is an athletic quarterback in Hudson Card. But the defense is going to be something to really watch for. I think the defense will be good. More likely than good, I think it will be great to near elite, especially when it comes to the coaching staff. The concern should be more for talent on the defense than coaching. It's the inverse of Ohio State's problem, where you know the talent's there, you just don't know if the coaching is elite yet. And does the program match the Big Ten's physicality? Because I'll tell you, there's a scenario in which Phil Longo's air raid doesn't fall flat on its face completely, and the team still isn't a success. It's what we talked about regarding Scott Frost earlier in the video, or you could even look at Chip Kelly at UCLA. Having tons of speed, tons of explosive potential, but your physicality sucks. Needed a long bit of silence there, because rest in peace to the spread option, and rest in peace to the no huddle spread option, the Chip Kelly offense. It's one of my favorite offenses, but if you want to win a national title with that offense, got to have more physicality. And that offense way prefers speed over physicality. TCU is an interesting case because at times they looked very physically weak last year, and then there were other times like the Fiesta Bowl, their games against Kansas State, and some of their more clutch matchups where they looked like one of the most physically and mentally tough teams in the country. So I'm not saying this offense or other spread offenses can't be tough. I'm just saying this offense hasn't really been tested in the Big Ten yet. And there's upside to that, and there's downside. The upside is if this offense is physically tough, because the Big Ten hasn't encountered it yet, defenses will have a extremely tough time trying to scheme against it. Like Wisconsin, if this works in year 1, they will have a massive schematic advantage over every defense that their offense matches up against. But if they have no physicality or little to medium physicality, defenses won't need to properly scheme for the offense because they'll shut it down. They'll bury them at the line of scrimmage. And Wisconsin's wide receivers aren't good enough to where you can just hurl it up without an offensive line and get somewhere. The wide receiver core isn't that good. So physicality and trench play, especially the play of Jake Renfro and of other starters on the offensive line who are projected currently to be Jack Nelson and Riley Malaman at tackle, apologize about that, and Tanner Bortolini and Michael Furtney at guard. The play of those 5 will be very critically important, along with Tanner Mordecai. So these are some questions that'll be answered in the fall as the fall progresses. I actually think we'll get a good idea of what Wisconsin is before they even begin Big Ten play. I think a road game at Washington State, who's stout on defense and has a competent quarterback in Cameron Ward, and playing Georgia Southern, who runs an air raid and will have a decent offense. Seeing how Wisconsin performs against those 3, Buffalo is included, of course, but Buffalo's the worst out of all of them, I think we'll get to see at least if Wisconsin is going to be a failed team or not. If they beat all those 3 teams very soundly, I'd say the wise prediction to make after those 3 games would be at least 9-10 wins if they beat all those 3 soundly without any massive issues like big turnovers, numerous turnovers, penalties, lack of discipline in running routes or coverage, etc. What'll take time to tell is if this team is actually a playoff or Big Ten championship contender. I don't think that'll be figured out until probably middle to late October. At the latest, late October, because that's when they play Ohio State. So, lots of questions for the Badgers, but I'm very optimistic on them. I'm actually going to have them inside of my top 15, top 10 in my top 25 video, which will release tomorrow. So if you want to watch that, and I think you should because it's going to be an awesome video, please hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video and your prediction for Wisconsin football down below. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you all around. Bye-bye.